Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano. It is the 20th of June, 2023. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So apologies for missing yesterday's episode, everyone. I know it's always a bit more of a rug when it happens on a Monday, when I miss an episode on a Monday, because obviously you don't get any refuels on the weekend there, but I just had to miss yesterday's for personal reasons. But that means that hopefully today will be a longer episode as there is a bunch of stuff to get through. So let's get into it. I guess the thing that people have been talking about a lot over the last day or so was something that I actually talked about 2 weeks ago on the refuel that I feel like is worth talking about again, because there is a bunch of new information that has been put out there, as well as a bunch of new concerns around around what I talked about. So what I'm talking about right now is this kind of ETH research post here that was originally put out by Mike Nuda, which would increase the max effective balance per validator, per Ethereum staking validator. Now, there was a lot of misinformation around this, where people were saying that, oh look, the the Ethereum core devs are going to change the minimum ETH required to stake per validator from 32 ETH to 2048 ETH, and that is not what's happening at all. So just to recap what this proposal is, and this isn't something that is like happening or anything, there's no EIP for this yet, it's literally just an ETH research post. But essentially what this proposal does is it would increase the max effective balance from 32 ETH to 2048 ETH, which means that each validator could have up to 2048 ETH staked on it instead of the 32 ETH that you have now. So the way it works now is that you stake 32 ETH, and that is your max effective balance and your min balance. So the minimum, obviously, to stake is 32 ETH, but it's also the maximum. So any more ETH that accrues on top of that 32 ETH in consensus layer rewards is not ETH that you get rewarded on. So if you have like 32 ETH and then you get 1 ETH worth of consensus layer rewards, and this was before withdrawals was enabled, because obviously with withdrawals being enabled, you can't accrue that much because of the fact that it automatically gets swept to, if you have the 0x01 credentials, it automatically gets swept to your withdrawal address. But before that was the case, people had like 34 ETH per validator, right? So that 2 ETH above 32 was doing nothing. It was effectively dead ETH. What this proposal does is make it so that that ETH is earning a proportional reward, obviously compared to the rest of the network. And obviously this is a really great proposal for something like solo stakers or home stakers, where essentially a solo staker can keep earning rewards on that ETH, can recompound that stake, rather than having to save up another 32 ETH to spin up another validator to earn rewards on that ETH. So you can begin earning rewards basically straight away on that ETH, obviously once you kind of restake it as part of your validator there. Now, the reason why this was brought up, I guess, over the last 24 hours, even though it's 2 weeks old now, is because crypto Twitter and I guess like people in general are just so far behind on things and aren't at the bleeding edge because they don't watch the refuel. And yes, I'm doing a bit of a plug for the refuel here, but I'm always proud whenever the refuel basically covers it. Whenever I cover this on the refuel, basically the day it gets posted or the day it happens, and then I see it like weeks, a lot of the time months later on crypto Twitter, and I'm just like, oh my god, like I already spoke about this, I already explained all of this, all you had to do is watch the refuel. But anyway, outside of that, the new topics of discussion, the new points of discussion around this were of the concerns that people brought up. Now, people brought up the fact that right now, as a large operator of validators, so say you are an operator that manages, I don't know, 100,000 validators or something like that, right? Obviously, it's not that big, but let's just say, because it's not there's no one entity or no one operator that runs 100,000 validators, but just for the sake of argument, say you run 100,000 validators. Now, you're probably not going to run all of those validators on the same machine for a number of different reasons, right? You're not going to run on the same machine for redundancy reasons, because you don't want, if that machine was to go offline, then all your validators go offline, right? Or those 100,000 go offline. You probably don't want to do it for slashing risks and other such risks like that. So what they do is they split these up. So maybe you split up 100,000 validators across 10 different machines. So you have 10,000 validators per machine. Now, the downside of that, though, is that there's a lot of overhead there. You have to manage 10 different machines, right? Or 10 different instances of different machines if you're running them on kind of cloud infrastructure. And obviously the risk of, I guess, like a catastrophic loss is reduced because you're spreading out the risk, but the overhead I don't know. I kind of think it nets out. It nets out to basically the same thing, because the overhead of having to manage all those things and make sure that you've secured each and every instance or box of what you're running these validators on as secure as each other, that they're all up to date, right? You maybe don't want to reuse the same credentials or the same keys, the same SSH keys across these different boxes as well. So yeah, it just becomes a kind of thing where it's like the trade-offs here. For these big operators, because what would happen in this world where the max effective balance was increased was that these validators, or these large validator operators, I should say, sorry, would consolidate, right? So instead of having 100,000 validators, and again, I'm just doing easy math here because I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, maybe they consolidate down to 10,000 validators, right, or 1,000 validators, depending on what the increase of the max is here. That would mean they'd probably just run them all on one box. So they get rid of all that, I guess, like redundancy they had before, and it would all be running on one box. But in saying that, there are other ways for these operators to do redundancy. So they could do it through something like DVT, or distributed validator technology, where they could, if they really wanted to, run those 10,000 validators on 10 different machines. They could have just different so that they could just have DVT tech like Obel running on those validators, so that if one machine was to go offline, right, the validators would still be online because the validators are running on these other machines as well. It would be effectively the same setup as they have today, right, in terms of kind of like the risk being spread out, and they'd be able to do that through DVT in this in this world where the max effective balance is increased like that. Secondly, this proposal is being kind of proposed as an opt-in thing. So what this means is that you don't have to actually do this. You can still keep those 100,000 validators as 32 ETH validators. You don't actually have to consolidate them all, right? So if you are worried about redundancy, if you are worried about correlated risks and stuff like that, what you could do is just not opt into this. And any ETH that you accrue and you want to compound, you could probably just spread across these validators. So instead of spinning up new validators, you could just spread it across the existing ones, in whatever increment you want to do. So I guess my point around the concerns around large operators here, and I'm speaking about this from someone who obviously doesn't run 100,000 validators or even thousands of validators, right? Someone who's not a huge operator of validators here, but from my point of view, from like at the outside looking in, I feel like that the trade-offs are worth it, because what we get in return for this, what we get in return is basically a way for solo validators to essentially be able to easily compound their stake. And it's not just solo validators, it's also rocket pool validators, any kind of like person that's running a validator, right, running a node at home. You also get decreased overhead on the beacon chain, because with less validators online, there's less peer-to-peer traffic, which means less bandwidth, and hardware requirements don't really change that much, but it's really around the bandwidth there, so less usage there, and obviously that's good for the network as well, because it means that there's less strain on the network overall. And this proposal would also unlock things like single slot finality and enshrined PBS, which obviously are huge upgrades for the network. So when you take this all together, I think that even if you want to take the most conservative approach here, and say that, okay, well, these are all the negative things, but here's all the positive things, they pretty much just net each other out. So I think that even if you take the most conservative approach, this proposal should go ahead just because of that. And I did say on Twitter that I'm neutral to positive on this proposal, and that's because I've looked at all the different kind of things. I've looked at the positives of it, I've looked at the negatives of it, and I've come to a conclusion that this is neutral, but probably more positive than the negative to put this through, because it really does help with obviously solo operators. It helps with reducing strain on the peer-to-peer layer, but it also helps with unlocking things like single slot finality and enshrined PBS. So when you take it all together, I think at this point in favor of this proposal going ahead. Maybe some things need to be tweaked here and there. Maybe there are certain aspects of this and certain properties of this that need to be tweaked. But generally, I'm in favor of increasing this max effective balance, because I believe that it will lead to better decentralization of the Ethereum validator sets, and also a better and more secure and healthier beacon chain overall, even with the concerns that I've mentioned there. But maybe you guys disagree with me on this. I'm all for being disagreed with. You can let me know in the Discord channel or even in the YouTube comments there. But this is an evolving proposal, as I said before. It is not. There's no EIP for this yet. It was only put out 2 weeks ago. There's going to be a lot of discussion around this as time goes on. But yeah, I do think it's something that should be seriously considered for inclusion. Probably not anytime soon. Maybe next year at some point. if it does go ahead, maybe the end of next year. I don't know if it would happen in the first half of next year, maybe the second half. But again, this is an early research phase. It is not an EIP yet or anything like that. But I'm curious to see how this evolves over time. And the last thing I want to say on this is that there were some people wondering that would your chance of proposing a block change because instead of having like 10 validators, you would only have one validator, but you'd have more ETH on that validator, which means your chance of proposing a block would be 1/10 of what it was before. That's not how it works. Your chance of proposing a block is actually not calculated per validators you have. It's calculated on the amount of basically ETH that you have. And now because the ETH is at 32, right? It's actually explained in this ETH research post, and I'm trying to kind of dumb it down here. But because it's at 32, from the perspective of the beacon chain, each validator has an equal chance of proposing a block. That's how I understand it. So if you had like 320 ETH on one validator or 32 ETH per validator on 10 different validators, you would have the same chance of proposing a block with one validator or 10 validator because it's based on the ETH stake, not on the validator. Not on the amount of validators that you have. So hopefully that clears it up there. But generally, I highly recommend going and checking out the actual ETH research post itself and a lot of the replies in the post because it's a great source of knowledge for everything I just talked about there. But anyway, moving on from that one, as I spent a lot of time on that, to another staking-related little Twitter thread here from Izzy, who is a master of validators at Lido. So there are two EIPs right now. One of them is already slated for inclusion in Denkun that is going to vastly improve the Ethereum staking experience, especially for just node operators generally here. So EIP 4788, which is one that I've talked about before, which is the beacon block route in the EVM proposal, is slated for inclusion in Denkun. And what this does is basically allow certain things to be accessed on the execution layer from the consensus layer, certain information to be accessed in a trustless way. Now, Izzy explains exactly what this is in the thread, so I won't go into any more detail there. But there is also another EIP 7002, which is called triggerable exits, which is also in discussion. I don't know if it's going to be included in Denkun or not, but it's definitely something that is in discussion right now. And what this would do is it would allow for forced exits of validators. So, for example, say you are validating with an operator and that operator doesn't honor your request to exit from the validator set or exit a validator that they're operating. From my understanding, what you could do is you could trigger a forced exit, which means that you could trigger the exit or the withdrawal of the validator itself without having to go through the operator to do that. Obviously, that's great for decentralization and insurances, and then assurances generally when staking with staking service providers and pools and stuff like that. So that's something that we would want included in the network as well. So those two EIPs are detailed here by Izzy in this Twitter thread, which I'll link in the YouTube description below for you to check out. But as I said, 4788 is already slated for inclusion in Denkun, whereas EIP 7002 is in discussion right now. It doesn't seem to be any reason why this wouldn't be included in a network upgrade. Not sure if it'll be included in Denkun. I think Denkun is still open for EIPs to be included in, but it is a pretty big network upgrade already. So maybe this kind of triggerable exits will be punted to the next upgrade, which hopefully will be 6 months after Denkun. But we'll have to keep an eye on that, and I'll definitely keep you guys up to date on that one. All right, last thing on ETH staking. So Nixo here basically tweeted out a screenshot of a post that someone made on ETH Staker. So the post basically says, I had enough, I exited my validator. And the reasoning for this, and this user is Morg444, they said, sorry, the APY is way too low. ETH continually declining and exchanges are being shut down or charging a fortune in fees. At this rate, crypto will be a back alley relic. I'd rather put the money into assets that appreciate and generate a decent return. When crypto is this difficult to use, it will never see wide adoption. And regardless, the API is incredibly low for the effort risk required. See ya. So this post itself seems like a lot of ranting and rambling. It kind of goes in a bunch of different directions here. It doesn't really make much sense. But Nixo shared this screenshot of this post and basically said, this is healthy and working as intended. The Ethereum proof of stake consensus mechanism doesn't overpay for security like proof of work did. If there are more than enough validators, low yield encourages you to put your assets elsewhere. Validators are in service of Ethereum, not the other way around. Now, I completely agree with Nixo's take here, and I want to have a broader discussion about this because I think this is very important. So, obviously, the yield for ETH staking is variable, right? There are two sources of yield. There are consensus layer rewards and execution layer rewards. Now, both of these sources of yield are variable. If more validators enter the beacon chain and come online, the consensus layer rewards for every validator goes down. That's just a simple issuance curve that's been set up for the beacon chain. Similarly, if validators exit and the less validators we have, and I'm talking net validators, the APY or the yield, ETH denominated yield for validators, for all the validators, will go up. So that's simple in the consensus layer side of things. Where things get a little bit more complex and maybe a lot harder to kind of reason about and try and predict what's going to happen is the execution layer rewards, because the execution layer rewards are made up of two things: tips and MEV revenue. Now, there's a lot of commingling of these things because tips can be MEV revenue, but they can't be as well because regular users send tips to the network too there. But generally, when it comes to any kind of fee revenue or MEV revenue, it is extremely volatile, as we've seen. Gas fees can go to 100 Gwei, right, and stay there for 2 weeks. The yield's going to be amazing for that 2 weeks for validators, but then it can drop to like 10 or 15 Gwei and stay there for a month, and then the yield is going to be really poor compared to what it was in those 2 weeks. And this is exactly why you don't extrapolate yield out to, a day. So you don't take like a day's worth of yield and extrapolate that out yearly, or you don't take a week's worth of yield and extrapolate that out yearly. Even monthly yield, extrapolating it out weekly, given how variable the yield can be, is probably not the way to go about it. So that's why people kind of look at this and they're like, oh my God, the yield's so low. It just keeps going lower, especially if they're looking at the total yield, not just the consensus layer yield, but also the execution layer yield. Then that's what's going to happen. More validators coming online, yield goes down the consensus layer side of things. More the fee revenue going down because the market's quiet, which means MEV revenue goes down, not just tips, less yield for validators, right? So the yield might have been 7% on 1 week, and then the yield is like, 4% on another week or something like that, right? So that's the kind of variability you will see there. Now, as Nixo said, this is actually healthy and working as intended. Validators are not owed anything. You are doing a job. The Ethereum network is paying you what it believes or what it has been programmed to pay you to do that job, right? In terms of consensus layer rewards. Execution layer rewards are variable because right now demand is quiet, right? Demand is quiet for use of block space, and users are paying what they feel is worth it to use the chain. Now, obviously, when things get hot, the gas fees go up and yield goes up with it, right? And also, obviously, as more validators join, if the Gwei price stays the same, if the Gwei is 100 and more validators join, and let's say it's a constant gas price at 100 Gwei, then obviously the yield is going to go down for everyone again because the fee revenue and the MEV revenue and the tips is being spread out amongst more validators. But as I said, this is the way it's intended to work. And if the APY isn't good enough for you, the APR I should say, then you unstake, right? If you want to take your ETH elsewhere, and this is the thing that kind of like gets me about this, is that, okay, you don't think the APR is high enough, then what are you going to do with your ETH? If you're still holding your ETH, if you're actually not selling your ETH and you're still holding it, but you don't want to stake it, then where are you putting it to get a higher APR than you would get with ETH staking? You're not. There's nowhere else that will give you a high APR on ETH, right? Other than staking it. Now, okay, maybe you want to use your ETH in a money market and then borrow against it to put stablecoin somewhere to get a higher yield. Okay, but you can do that with an LSD. You can do that with RETH. You can do that with STETH. You can put them in money markets and you can borrow against it and do exactly that, right? So you could still be earning the ETH denominated yield, borrow those stable coins. Then you have to obviously factor in the borrow costs, but you'd still be earning more than if you were just doing vanilla ETH because you're still getting that ETH yield, right? So when you think about it like that, it doesn't really seem logical to unstake your ETH because the APY is going lower than what you expected it to be, unless you're planning to sell your ETH for USD, right? So that doesn't make much sense to me to do that. So from that perspective, that's why you don't really see anyone exiting, because logically it makes very little sense. Logically, most, if not everyone, staking their ETH is obviously long ETH for the longer term, and hopes that ETH will appreciate in the long term because it is an ETH denominated yield. So even if the yield is only like 3%, right? it's still ETH denominated. So if ETH goes like 2x, you are much better off staking your ETH, getting that 3% than you were cashing that ETH out to stablecoins and getting like a 4% yield on stablecoins. Yes, there's obviously vastly different risk profiles here of holding in stablecoins, obviously going to be stable compared to holding ETH where it's going to be volatile, but that's the kind of calculus that you really have to do at the end of the day. And that's the calculus obviously that I do and that I think a lot of people do as well. So that's my rant about that. But there's also another important point here about yield when it comes to staking ETH. There are going to be other ways to generate yield on top of your staked ETH, such as Eigenlayer. Now, this changes the calculus a bit. And there is a concern here that a lot of ETH is going to be staked, right? The staking yield will go down to what? 1% or something like that for just staking your ETH on the Beacon chain, whether that's through an LSD or otherwise. And then what ends up happening is that if you want to get more yield on it, you have to go do restaking, right? You have to go opt into something like Eigenlayer or one of the services that Eigenlayer offers there. So you actually can't stake without staking with Eigenlayer, and then what ends up happening is it might centralize the stake into Eigenlayer, and that causes a security concern. So that one I actually kind of I can see the concern around that, and I understand that, and I think that there obviously needs to be more research done into that and the incentives around that. But at the same time, that is probably something that's not going to happen for a little while, right? So we've got time to kind of talk about it and research it and stuff like that, and there are people doing this. That's something that needs to be considered as well, where the APY of vanilla ETH staking can actually go really low. Because let's just say, for example, you stake your ETH, the APR, I should say APR because it's not APY, APR is 1% for staking vanilla ETH. But then you can go restake that with Eigenlayer and get another, 3% on top of that? Well, suddenly your ETH denominated stake or ETH denominated yield is back up to 4%, right? So anyone who's just staking vanilla ETH, they're actually worse off. Yes, you take on more risk restaking, but is it worth it to you? So there is a risk factor there. There's obviously a knowledge factor as well. Not everyone's going to know that they can do this. And there's obviously a time value of money thing as well. Like if you put it into Eigenlayer, like how fast could you get your liquidity back? Is there going to be another LSD on top of that? There's a lot of considerations to be had here. And these are the things that we obviously as a community need to talk about. But yeah, that's generally how I think about all these things here. But anyway, enough on that one. I want to go over the other things I have to talk about today, but just a great tweet and prompt there for me to talk to. So thank you, Nixo, for putting that out. All right, L2Beat has introduced a new section of their website called Stages. So what this is basically if you go to the L2Beat website, which I'll do right now to show you, I should have had this up before, but I'll quickly get it up here, is that you can actually go to the projects here and you can see that there's a new column called Stage. Now, the stages range from stage 0, 1, and 2, and what this does is it basically describes what each stage each layer 2 is at. Now, what are these stages? Well, they were defined by Vitalik in his Ethereum Magicians post here, and each of these stages are basically different properties of the rollup. So at stage 0, a rollup or an L2 will have full training wheels. They'll have like a centralized operator, centralized sequencer, they'll have admin keys, all that stuff there. Then stage 1, they'll have limited training wheels. So there will be a running fraud proof or validity proof system. The multi-sig will be stricter, it'll be a 6 of 8 or something like that, and a bunch of other things here. And then stage 2 is the ultimate stage where there is no training wheels. There is no multi-sig or admin key or anything like that. Upgrades are allowed, but they must have a delay of over 30 days. And if there's a security council, there has to follow these things. But yeah, those are the 3 stages here. So you can check that out, Vitalik's post. But on L2Beat, you can actually see they've labeled every project that they can so far with different stages. So you can see that Arbitrum 1 is currently at stage 1 because they have a fraud-proof system, but it is only open to whitelisted actors right now. And upgrades unrelated to on-chain provable bugs provide less than 30 days to exit, and the Security Council's actions are not confined to on-chain provable bugs. So this is giving you information about exactly what stage they're at here. And not only is that quick overview available to you, you can click through and then you can actually see which requirements each rollup is actually meeting. So you can see stage 0, all 4 requirements were met. Stage 1, 5 requirements are met, and then Stage 2 for Arbitrum 1, 3 issues need fixing. So this is actually an amazing resource here on L2Beat. This is great because not only does this give you a quick overview on the parent page here of what stage it's at, but it also breaks down exactly what stage each project is at. And you can actually see that pretty much only 2 of the rollups right now are at Stage 2, which is the stage that we want every rollup to be at, and that's D-Gate and Fuel V1. Now, of course, both of these are very small right now. D-Gate is only got $2.6 million of TVL. Fuel V1's only got $452 of TVL, so it's not really gonna anything to write home about there. But if we start seeing, the top rollups here going to Stage 1 and then Stage 2, it's a really positive sign because it means that these rollups are obviously becoming more decentralized and secure, and users can have very good, I guess, certainty over using them and using them as they're meant to be, not using them as kind of like centralized chains that really at the whim of the core team, but actually inheriting Ethereum security and decentralization properties and decentralizing themselves here. So just really great to see that. I really like this new feature from L2Beat. You can go check out their website and click through to each of these stages yourself, and of course you can check out Vitalik's original Ethereum Magicians post here to see what this was all about to begin with. All right, Connext has announced that MetaMask has integrated with it, so users can now bridge via the MetaMask portfolio app and the MetaMask browser extension natively. So great to see Connext being integrated into more, I guess, like wallets here. Obviously, MetaMask being the biggest Web3 wallet right now, supports a bunch of different EVM chains out of the box, very easy to use, and everyone loves using it. Well, loves using it is maybe a subjective thing because I personally don't mind using it, but at the same time, it is definitely not a wallet that is something that is going to lead to mass adoption. It definitely not a beautiful wallet. It's just a very functional wallet, but not something that is like Rainbow, for example, or some of those other mobile wallets out there. But still, it is the most popular wallet. A lot of people use it, and Connext integrating with it obviously is a very big deal, and something that we should be happy about. Now, I think that when it comes to these bridges and native integrations and stuff like that, it's kind of weird because I am a big believer in like these bridge aggregators such as LeFi, which I've talked about before, and obviously I've disclosed before that I'm an investor in them. But these bridge aggregators, the reason why I think that they're like I'm much more bullish on them than I am on something like a DEX aggregator is because with the bridge aggregator, what it does is it basically brings all of these kind of like disparate liquidity from these bridges together and gives you the path that you can use. But the path that you can use isn't just based on the liquidity, it's based on the time as well. Because when you look at a decentralized exchange aggregator, usually depending on the fee you pay, you're going to get the same execution time of like a block or two from any DEX that you use, even if you're using an aggregator, right? Except if you're using something like CowSwap, but I'm talking just the normal DEXs here, not the MEV resistant DEXs or something like CowSwap. I'm talking the normal DEXs. Whereas with a bridge aggregator, there are different bridges that have different speeds. So for example, the native bridge into Arbitrum of Optimism might take 10 or 15 minutes, whereas another bridge may only take like 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes, right? So with a bridge aggregator, this is going to show you exactly how long these things are going to take and exactly what the fee is going to be and what you're going to be left with on the other side of what you're bridging to. So I think that's a key difference there. And I think that's what makes bridge aggregators so important, is showing the user the time, because at the end of the day, there can be big differences between these, because it can be up to an hour for some of these bridges, right? It just depends which one you're using. So I think that's why it's important for bridge aggregators to basically be integrated with these things. And I don't know if LeFi is natively integrated with MetaMask. I know that MetaMask might have its own bridge aggregator. I'm not sure. I remember seeing something about that somewhere. But regardless of that, it's still cool to see them integrate natively with bridges themselves, because Connext, as I mentioned the other day, is not just a bridge. What they're trying to build is a whole kind of like cross-layer, cross-chain ecosystem where you have native cross-chain and cross-layer apps that you can use, and having that natively integrated into wallets is obviously a big plus here. So anyway, you can go check this out. I'll link in the YouTube description below. But the last thing I want to talk about was something unfortunate that you've probably all heard about by now. But for those of you who don't know who ZachXBT is, he's been around for quite a while on crypto Twitter now, and he is very well known and famous for exposing a lot of the scammers and grifters in the crypto ecosystem. Now, of course, by doing this, he opens himself up to a lot of personal risk and liability here, because he is anon, but at the same time he's not, where it's very easy to actually know who he is, because he's not like totally anon. He hasn't his identity is known if you want to find it, which is unfortunate for him. But as you've probably all seen by now, one of the, I guess, people that he exposed, Jeffrey Huang, or Machi Big Brother, has sued ZachXBT for defamation here. So you can see Zach's thread here. I'll link it in the YouTube description below if you haven't seen it yet. But essentially, what Machi is suing Zach for is defamation, saying that Zach basically, called out Machi for these scams and grifts, and Machi denies that any of them are scams and grifts, which, I mean, I'm not going to make a judgment call here because I don't want to get myself sued or anything like that. But honestly, I read through Zach's threads about Machi, and it seems like Zach didn't really defame him, in my opinion. It seems like he really just put the evidence out there, and it seems like the evidence is pretty damning against Machi here. But I guess like the fact that this is going to court, we're going to see all of this stuff coming out in discovery. And yeah, because it's going to court, Zach obviously needs to be able to hire lawyers, and legal costs in the US are definitely not cheap here, unfortunately. So Zach has set up a donation address here, an ETH address, and I think there's over $1 million donated to him so far, which, I mean, the legal costs can usually run up to that amount, so hopefully that'll be enough for him to cover his legal costs. But I think more donations are going to roll in over time, obviously, and you can donate to him if you want to there as well. But really, this is a David and Goliath story, as Zach says here, because Zach doesn't have that much money to defend himself here, but Machi Big Brother is really, really rich. I mean, I think he has tens of thousands of ETH. His net worth is huge, so obviously he can afford to do this. And obviously he's doing this as kind of like a personal thing because he thinks his name has been dragged through the mud or whatever. But yeah, we'll have to see how the case plays out. It's apparently there is. I don't know when this case is actually going to play out, but yeah, there is going to be a discovery phase. Obviously, everything's going to be aired out into the open. I do wonder if Machi is going to withdraw this lawsuit at some point. Maybe because he didn't think that Zach would be able to defend himself, and he would get like a default judgment or something like that. But yeah, we'll have to see how this shakes out. But I'll link Zach's thread in the YouTube description below for you to check out. But on that note, that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give that video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.